We now turn to our new friend, Paul Callan, criminal defense attorney, CNN legal analyst, who joins us for the second day in a row. Hey, Paul, how are you, sir?
Not bad, Steve. And yourself?
I'm doing well. I want to ask you specifically about something. The defense did something which was unique in their closing arguments. Mr. O'Mara went and he sat down for 4 full minutes, and he ran a clock. And he said that was the amount of time that Trayvon Martin had to get home before there was a confrontation from the time George Zimmerman made the call, and he did not go home. 4 full minutes. And then in their rebuttal, the defense said that the greatest fear a child has is being followed home by a stranger. Who do you think won that little battle of in the closing arguments?
Well, you know, that was sort of a moment in court that made you think. And most judges, by the way, won't let you get away with that, at least not a 4-minute sit in silence. You know, I've seen it in other cases where you're trying to demonstrate to the jury that a minute is a long time, but 4 minutes is an excruciatingly long period of time. Imagine 4 minutes of radio silence.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, and obviously it does lead to that contradictory issue of if a child is in fear and the thing he fears most is being followed, then why didn't he run home? Where was he during the 4-minute period of time? I suspect in the end the jury's going to decide that Trayvon Martin doubles back to confront George Zimmerman because he was angry about being thought to be a criminal, and he was going to confront Zimmerman and give him a piece of his mind. I'm just betting that's the way it went down, and that's what the jury's going to think. That still doesn't solve the problem, though, of who's guilty of homicide or who's not guilty here, because that just tells us how the confrontation begins. The real question is, did Zimmerman act in self-defense when he fired the fatal shot? And that's what the jury's going to struggle with.
Now, and also manslaughter.
Yes.
I've heard the criticisms of the defense, and they're minor. But that maybe he was too methodical and too non-emotional, and B, that maybe there wasn't enough emphasis placed by O'Mara on manslaughter, and it might make it too easy for the jury to come back with that. What do you think?
Well, you know, the murder count, you have to remember, the murder count was fashioned by prosecutors originally with the idea that Trayvon Martin was being racially profiled. And if you're just following and harassing somebody because of the color of their skin, clearly that would be a violation of law in Florida, and it would be one of the elements of that murder count. The judge threw that out and said, you know, there's no evidence of racial profiling here. But she did allow them to make this argument that he was being profiled as a criminal. And I still sort of struggle with that because a lot of people profile criminals, and sometimes they make mistakes, and I'll give you an example. I'll bet the prosecutor in the case, probably if stats hold for him like they do for everybody else, probably 10 to 15% of the cases he tries, the defendant is found not guilty. Now, has he improperly profiled somebody by accusing them of a crime that a jury ultimately acquitted them of?
Right.
It sounds criminal almost, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like that would be the grounds for a greater or a higher count. And but the judge let that go to the jury, and I think, by the way, there's no question that happened in this case. I mean, the reason he was following Trayvon Martin was because he thought he was a criminal. He was mistaken, probably, but at least he was mistaken in terms of probably what was going on that night, and you know, that's what the whole case is about. So it's hard to say how that will play out. In terms of manslaughter itself, as O'Mara said, self-defense is a defense to manslaughter, and it's also a defense to murder. So I think O'Mara adequately covered his bases on that. I mean, he said something to the jury which really was, start out with the self-defense issue, because if you think Zimmerman acted in self-defense, the case is over.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
That's and I think if you see a quick verdict in this case, Steve, it's more likely to be an acquittal. When they're out for a long time, then you're going to see some beads of sweat on the on the heads of the defense lawyers and George Zimmerman.
You know, Paul, we heard her, and we're talking to Paul Callan, criminal defense attorney, CNN legal analyst on the Steve Malzberg Show. There was a report that one of the jurors had tears in her eyes when the prosecution was giving their rebuttal today. But the judge said, and tell me how important you think this is, at the very end of the instructions, Sympathy and anger do not count and must not influence your decision. Is that possible to hold to as a jurist?
I don't think it is. And let me tell you something. I've tried a lot of murder cases, and we always say that you can't factor in emotion and sympathy. But, when they get back in the jury room, who's to say what's going to go on? Now, what's unusual about this jury, it's all female, and I think 5 out of the 6 are mothers. You usually see a gender mix in juries. So, this is a lot of women with kids looking at the death of a 17-year-old, by the just turned 17.
Sure.
So I'd be real worried about the emotion and the sympathy, notwithstanding the judge's instruction, but to the contrary. You got to worry about that if you're a defense attorney.
We have 30 seconds, Paul. What do you think is going to happen? Long verdict, long deliberation, and where will this verdict wind up?
Well, I think we're looking at a Saturday or a Sunday verdict.
Really? Wow.
I think, and because they're sequestered, and the fact pattern's not all that complicated. I also think that if it's a fast verdict, it'll be an acquittal. I think it's going to be a manslaughter conviction or an acquittal. And by the way, if there's a manslaughter conviction, I think it's going to get reversed on appeal because I don't think there's enough evidence to support it.
Sir, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend.